Hello, my friend. Welcome back to another quiet journey through the ancient world. Tonight, let me guide you gently into a story that drifts like wind over the Aegean Sea. A story whispered by old poets. A story shaped by the hands of fate. Tonight, we return to the beginning, to the night when a dream became a prophecy, and a prophecy became a destiny no city could escape. So let your breath slow, let your eyes grow heavy, and let the soft shadows of ancient Troy rise around you, like warm smoke in the quiet dark. This is where it all begins. Far across the sea, long before the walls of Troy fell, the city glowed gently beneath the night sky. The torches along its gates flickered in long, wavering lines. The marble towers stood still under the pale moonlight. A warm wind blew across the plains, touching every stone, every rooftop, every sleeping soul. And in the highest chamber of the royal palace, Queen Hecuba slept beneath delicate linens, unaware that this night would shape the fate of her kingdom. In her dream, she stood alone in the courtyard of Troy. The sky above her was dark, rolling like an endless storm. The air trembled, heavy with a strange and ancient warning. Then she saw it aflame, a single spark that leapt from the shadows. Small at first, quiet, almost gentle. It flickered like a candle flame caught in the wind. But it grew. It spread. And in moments, the spark became a burning brand, a glowing ember that slipped from her hands and fell upon the stones. Then the dream changed. The ember rolled across the courtyard. Everywhere it touched, fire bloomed. Not a destructive fire, but a luminous, golden blaze that swallowed the streets like a living creature of light. The city burned silently, brightly, beautifully, and Hecuba watched in helpless stillness as Troy melted into shimmering waves of fire. A voice rose within the dream, soft, distant, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. "You will give birth," the voice said, "to a child of great beauty, but he will be the downfall of Troy. The spark that destroys the city will come from your own womb." The words drifted through her like smoke. She tried to speak, tried to cry out, but her voice dissolved into the firestorm, and the dream collapsed into darkness. Hecuba awoke with a quiet gasp. Her breath trembled. Her heart moved in long, heavy beats. Outside her window, Troy was peaceful. The city slept beneath the starlit sky, but the echo of the dream clung to her like mist on her skin. She knew it was not simply a nightmare. It was a message, a warning. And when dawn approached, she sought the only person in Troy who could interpret the meaning. The seer, the priest, the ancient interpreter of divine dreams. He stood beside a flickering lamp in the temple, his long robes brushing against the stone floor. His eyes were pale and unblinking, as though he could see straight through the world and into the realm of the gods. He listened silently as Hecuba told her dream, every detail, every spark, every whispered word. When she finished, the temple fell silent. A silence so deep it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. At last, the seer spoke. His voice was soft, but each word carried the weight of fate. "My queen," he said, "your dream is a prophecy. The gods have spoken to you. The child you carry will be born in beauty, and his charm will shine as brightly as the sun. But he will bring ruin to Troy. His life and the city's destruction are bound together by threads the gods themselves have woven." Hecuba felt the world tilt gently beneath her. She pressed a hand to her stomach. The child within her stirred, as though acknowledging the prophecy. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent plea to the gods. But the gods do not unweave the cloth of fate. Once the pattern is formed, it cannot be undone. As the months passed, the queen's fear grew like a quiet vine twisting around her thoughts. Still, she carried the child with tenderness. She hoped perhaps the prophecy would fade, perhaps the dream was only a shadow, not a truth. But when the boy was born, all who saw him understood that he was touched by something divine. The child was radiant, strong, beautiful, a baby whose presence felt like warm sunlight settling over the palace. They named him Paris, but even the name could not silence the echo of the prophecy. King Priam, though loving and wise, faced an impossible choice: protect his kingdom or protect his son. And so the decision was made. One quiet morning, the king called for a shepherd from Mount Ida, a gentle man who lived among the hills, tending to flocks under the open sky. The shepherd approached, his head bowed with respect. Priam placed the infant Paris in his arms. The baby opened his eyes, soft, dark, and strangely calm. Priam's lips trembled as he gave his order. No king wishes to command such a task. But the prophecy had weighed too heavily, and destiny demanded its due. The shepherd carried the child away from Troy, away from the palace, away from the prophecy. He climbed the rocky slopes of Mount Ida, where the winds moved between the pines like the hushed voices of old spirits. The sky above him was pale and quiet, and the shepherd felt the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. He looked down at the sleeping child, at the perfect, peaceful face, at the tiny fingers curled gently around the edge of his cloak. And suddenly, he found he could not do what he had been asked to do. His hands trembled, his breath quivered. He placed the baby gently upon a soft patch of grass, beneath the shadows of the tall pines. He whispered a prayer to the gods, for forgiveness, for mercy, for the life of this innocent child. Then he turned away. He walked. He forced himself not to look back. But after only a short distance, a strange feeling overcame him. A sense that something unseen was happening behind him. A pull, like a hand upon his heart. He stopped. He inhaled the mountain air, and slowly, he turned back toward the place where he had left the child. What he saw made him freeze. Paris was alive. Not only alive, but peaceful, comforted, cradled in the arms of a large she-bear. The great creature lay quietly beside him, its warm fur wrapped around the child like a blanket, its dark eyes calm, protective, almost maternal. The shepherd felt a chill slide through his skin. He knew then that this child belonged to fate, not to death. The gods had intervened. They had chosen to spare him, and a life protected by the gods could not be taken by mortal hands. The shepherd knelt in awe. He gathered the child gently back into his arms. The bear rose, watched him for a moment, and then disappeared silently into the forest. It was as if nature itself had handed the boy back to him, a sign that Paris was meant to live, meant to grow, meant to fulfill whatever destiny the gods had written for him. The shepherd carried the baby home, his heart beating softly with a mixture of fear and wonder. He told his wife only that the child was abandoned, left to die on the mountain, and together they chose to raise him as their own. They fed him, clothed him, held him, whispered to him beneath the warm glow of the hearth. He grew among lambs, wildflowers, mountain winds, and gentle evenings where the world felt safe and simple. He learned to climb the ridges of Ida, to run barefoot across the meadows, to listen to the music of the streams that curled through the forest. He became kind, curious, quick to smile. A boy loved not only by his adoptive parents, but by nature itself. Birds settled near him. The flocks followed him. Even the wild creatures of the hills moved gently in his presence. Yet, no matter how peaceful his childhood, the prophecy remained like a sleeping shadow behind him, hidden, silent, waiting, because fate does not disappear. It only sleeps until the moment it is called. And though the shepherd's home was filled with laughter and peace, the threads of destiny tugged quietly at the edges of Paris' life. Subtle signs, soft movements, a pull towards something greater than the hills of Ida. Some nights, when the moon was bright, the shepherd would sit by the doorway and watch Paris sleep. The child's face glowed with a stillness that felt almost divine, and the shepherd would wonder what life awaited this boy. What story was unfolding around him? What future had been woven long before his birth? But no answers ever came. Only the wind, only the rustle of leaves, only the vast, quiet mystery of the mountain night. Years passed gently. Paris grew tall and graceful. His presence carried a calm the shepherd could never explain. He walked with a confidence that seemed older than his age. His voice carried a softness, a musical quality that made others lean in to hear. He laughed often. He loved deeply. And in the stillness of dawn, when the first light touched the mountain, he looked almost like a figure carved by the gods themselves. And still no one knew who he truly was. No one knew the palace he was born to. No one knew the prophecy tied to his name, but destiny knew. And destiny waited. For fate moves slowly at first, like a gentle breeze over sleeping grass, like a whisper in the quiet of the night. But it always moves, always circles back, always returns to the place where everything began. And for Paris, the moment of return was drawing near. But for now, in this chapter, in this moment, in this quiet night, Paris was only a child, a boy raised by a kind shepherd and his wife, a child of the mountains, a soul untouched by the knowledge of who he would one day become, a spark resting quietly before the flame, a seed of destiny wrapped in innocence. The wind moved softly across Mount Ida. The stars turned slowly overhead, and somewhere high above, the gods watched in silence, waiting, watching, weaving, because fate cannot be stopped, fate cannot be denied, and the prophecy whispered in Hecubus' dream would one day awaken. But tonight the world is still, the air is calm, the child sleeps peacefully beneath the dark pines, and the story of Troy is only just beginning. Tonight, we continue our quiet journey through the ancient world, a world woven with light, wind, and whispers of destiny, a world where gods still touched the earth, and mortals walked among their shadows. So rest your thoughts, let your breath slow, let the mountains of Ida rise around you once more, soft and blue beneath the early dawn, and follow me back into the myth that shaped the fate of Troy. This is the tale of a golden apple, 3 goddesses, and a choice that changed the world. Long before Paris stood in the valley of Ida, another story began far across the sea. It was a celebration unlike any other, hosted by the gods themselves, the wedding of Peleus, a noble mortal, and Thetis, a sea-born goddess of shimmering silver light. Every deity of Olympus was invited, every divine table filled with ambrosia and wine. Music drifted like warm mist through the air. Laughter shimmered like crystal bells, and as the gods danced beneath the golden skies, the world below felt blessed by their joy. But one goddess was absent, Eris, the spirit of discord, the weaver of strife, the whisperer of jealousy. She had not been invited, and where Eris was uninvited, trouble always followed. In her anger, she lifted a small golden apple, bright as the sun itself, polished, perfect, dangerous. She carved a single inscription into its surface, a short phrase simple, but sharp as a blade: "To the fairest." Then she let the apple fall into the heart of the celebration. The golden fruit rolled across the marble floor, catching the light of the torches as it spun, and 3 goddesses paused, their eyes drawn to its gleam. Hera, the queen of the gods, draped in regal gold; Athena, the goddess of wisdom and battle, cloaked in shining gray; and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, glowing with gentle rose-colored radiance. Each one looked at the apple, Each one believed it belonged to her. A soft breeze stirred the hall. The music faded into silence. The wedding feast dissolved into tension, and the gods understood that this small apple would not be settled easily. Not between a queen, a warrior, and the embodiment of beauty itself. Zeus, wishing to avoid choosing among them, called for a judge, not a god, not a hero, but a mortal, someone untouched by divine politics, someone whose heart the gods believed could still be honest. And so the eyes of Olympus turned toward a young shepherd on Mount Ida, a man whose beauty matched the sunrise, a man raised in the quiet of the hills, unaware of the blood that flowed in his royal veins, a man named Paris. Far from the turmoil on Olympus, Paris wandered the valley that morning. The air was cool and still. Birdsong rose from the treetops. The sky was tinted with soft lavender light. The grass swayed in long waves beneath the wind, and the mountains stood tall behind him, ancient and calm. Paris moved with ease, his flock trailing gently behind him. He breathed deeply, savoring the scent of pine, fresh earth, and distant sea breeze. Life was simple here, quiet, tender, but destiny had already begun its slow descent toward him. Suddenly, the light in the valley shifted. It grew warmer, brighter, as if the sun had fallen just a little closer to the earth. Paris paused. He lifted his head. The wind stilled around him. The birds went silent. Then 3 shapes shimmered into view at the far edge of the clearing. Figures of impossible grace, figures whose very presence made the world hold its breath. Hera, Athena, Aphrodite. They did not walk toward him. They drifted, as though the air itself carried them forward. Paris stepped back, startled by the radiance before him. And yet, he felt a strange calm settling over his heart, a softness like moonlight resting on water. The goddesses stood before him, each one shining with a different kind of beauty. Hera spoke first. Her voice was smooth, regal, steady, a voice that could command the heavens themselves. Paris of Troy, she said, though he did not yet know he belonged to Troy. You have been chosen to judge which of us is the fairest. It is a sacred task, a divine task, and you must choose with care. Athena stepped forward next. Her eyes were sharp, bright as stars, filled with knowledge deeper than the seas. Your decision will echo through time, she said. It will shape kingdoms. It will shift the destiny of men. Choose with wisdom, shepherd. Finally, Aphrodite stepped closer. Her presence was gentle, warm, soothing, like sunlight settling on closed eyelids. She did not speak yet. She only looked at Paris, and in that look, something soft rippled through the air. Paris swallowed. He felt small before them, yet strangely honored. He held the golden apple in his hands. It glowed faintly, as though aware of the choice to come. And the goddesses began to offer their gifts. Hera approached first. The valley brightened around her as though the clouds parted in her honor. Her gown shimmered like hammered gold. Her crown flickered with starlight. Choose me, she said, her voice deep and certain. And I will make you king over all of Asia and Europe. Your name will be carved into marble. Your rule will be unchallenged. Your wealth will surpass that of every living man. No kingdom will stand above yours. Power, glory, authority, all this will be yours. Paris felt the weight of her promise. He imagined standing upon a throne, commanding nations, ruling with unmatched power. He felt the echo of that future brush against him like a warm breeze. But before he could speak, Athena stepped forward. The light around her turned silver, crisp, clear, like moonlight reflected on a sword. Her armor gleamed softly beneath the sunlight that filtered through the leaves. Choose me, she said, and I will give you strength beyond measure. I will teach you the wisdom of battle, the strategy of kings, you will become the greatest hero the world has ever known. Your name will be sung by poets. Children will whisper stories of your courage beneath the stars. You will stand unbroken in every challenge, brave, victorious, immortal in memory. The vision rose before him: armies, shields, laurels, songs, a life of triumph carved into the ages. Paris felt its pull, proud, steady, honorable. He held the apple tighter. Then Aphrodite moved, not with the force of Hera, not with the brilliance of Athena, but with a softness that wrapped around the heart. The air warmed. The scent of blooming flowers drifted through the valley, though none grew nearby. The wind carried whispers of something tender, something fragile, something deeper than kingship or war. Aphrodite's eyes met his, calm, luminous, filled with a kindness that seemed to settle beneath the skin. "Paris," she said, her voice like a quiet melody carried on water. "I offer you something no throne, no army, no victory can equal. I offer you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. She will look upon you with devotion, with warmth, with a longing that binds two souls together. She will walk beside you. She will choose you. She will love you in a way that bends destiny itself." A hush fell over the valley. Paris felt his breath catch. For while the promises of the others were grand, this one felt intimate, human, alive. A promise of connection, of heart, of beauty so profound it could melt the world. A tenderness he had never known, yet had always longed for in the quiet corners of his spirit. The golden apple grew warmer in his hands. A light breeze curled between the pines. The world leaned in around him, waiting. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to his own heartbeat. Slow, steady, true. When he opened them, he lifted the apple. His hand did not tremble. His voice did not shake. He walked forward with gentle steps. Toward the goddess of love, he placed the apple in Aphrodite's waiting hands. The light around her flared soft rose, pale gold, the color of dawn blooming across the horizon. She smiled. A smile warm enough to quiet the sky itself. "You have chosen love," she whispered, "and love will choose you." She leaned close, her voice drifting like a breeze against his ear. "But remember, Paris, the threads of love and war are never far apart. What warms the heart can also burn a kingdom. What brings joy can also shape tragedy. But your choice is true, and destiny thanks you for it." Hera turned away, her eyes narrow with wounded pride. Athena stepped back, her expression shadowed with quiet resentment. Neither goddess spoke, but the air grew heavier around them. A shift in the wind, a promise of storms far in the distance, and Paris felt something ripple through him, a subtle chill, a stirring in the fabric of time, as if the world had tilted ever so slightly toward an unseen future. Aphrodite reached out and touched his cheek. Her fingers were warm, as gentle as sunlight breaking through morning fog. "Do not fear," she said. "Your heart has chosen the path it knows best. And soon, you will meet the woman destiny has woven for you. Her name will drift to you like a song you have always known. And when you see her, you will understand why the apple was yours to give." The goddess dissolved into shimmering light. Hera and Athena vanished like fading starlight. The valley grew quiet again. The birds resumed their singing. The wind sighed through the pines, and Paris stood alone, the echo of his choice settling through him like a soft tremor. He breathed slowly. He looked down at his hands. They felt different, as though they held not a shepherd's staff, but the weight of something far greater. He did not yet know who the most beautiful woman in the world was. He did not know where she lived, or how he would find her. But a pull, a gentle tug beneath his ribs told him that their meeting was inevitable. Drawn by fate, called by love, guided by the goddess whose promise now lived in his heart, the light shifted on the mountains. the sky turned a deeper blue, and far beyond the valley, in a city called Sparta, a queen named Helen felt a breeze brush her cheek, a breeze carrying the faintest whisper of a future she could not yet see, a whisper shaped by a golden apple, by a shepherd prince, by the soft, unavoidable pull of destiny. Paris walked slowly back toward his flock. The sheep gathered around him, unaware of the divine encounter that had just unfolded in their quiet meadow. He knelt among them, running his hands through their wool. The simple motions calmed him, grounded him. But somewhere inside, the world had changed. The valley felt the same, yet new. The wind hummed with hidden messages, and the sun lingered longer on his skin, as though watching him with new interest. He lifted his face to the sky. The clouds drifted in thin, delicate strands. The world felt vast and fragile all at once. Paris exhaled, slow and deep. He did not know what fate awaited him, but he felt it approaching, softly, surely, like footfalls on a distant road. The choice was made, the apple was given, and the story of Troy had turned its first true page. But for now, in this valley, in this moment, in this soft hour of daylight, Paris remained simply a shepherd, a young man sitting among wild flowers and mountain winds, a soul suspended between the innocence of his past and the destiny waiting just beyond the horizon. The pines swayed gently above him. The sun drifted slowly toward afternoon, and somewhere, hidden deep within the tapestry of time, the first threads of war began to shimmer. But the world was still quiet, still peaceful, still wrapped in the hush of early fate. And the story was only growing deeper. Tonight, let us drift gently to the kingdom of Sparta, a land of mountains and quiet rivers, a place where history and myth breathe together in the soft morning air. Close your eyes, slow your thoughts, and follow my voice, because in this chapter, we step into the life of a woman whose beauty shaped the destiny of nations, a woman whose presence felt like moonlight resting on still water, a woman known across the ancient world as Helen of Sparta. She was born of both mortal and divine lineage, a child who carried the shimmering grace of the gods. Poets said her skin held the glow of dawn. Her eyes mirrored the calm of the Aegean Sea. Her voice was soft, like the distant hum of wind through olive trees. When she walked, the world seemed to pause. When she smiled, the air around her brightened like a silver flame. And so, people whispered that she was the most beautiful woman ever to live. Not merely lovely, but luminous, enchanting, the kind of beauty that felt like destiny itself. Kings and princes from every corner of Greece traveled to Sparta seeking her hand. Some brought gold, some brought jewels, some brought promises of kingdoms yet to rise. But beauty can be dangerous. Beauty can divide nations. Helen's father, King Tyndareus, feared that choosing a husband for her might lead to war. He feared envy. He feared rivalry. He feared the storms that stirred in men's hearts. So he sought counsel from a man of clever mind, Odysseus of Ithaca, a king known not for wealth or armies, but for wisdom sharp as a blade and subtle as a whisper. Odysseus offered a solution that would bind all suitors in loyalty rather than competition. He proposed a sacred oath. Every man who sought Helen's hand must swear to defend the chosen husband, not just with goodwill but with their lives. If ever harm befell the marriage, all who had sworn the oath must rise together, unified, resolute, bound by honor. So the suitors swore, on altars lit with sacred flame, on the names of the gods who listened from above. Menelaus of Sparta, strong, steadfast, noble, became Helen's husband. When she placed her hand in his, Sparta rejoiced. The people believed the oath would protect the kingdom, protect Helen, protect peace. But fate listens to no oath. And destiny has its own quiet rhythm. Years passed gently. Helen walked the palace halls with grace, wrapped in silks dyed the color of morning clouds. She watched the sun rise over the mountains. She listened to the songs of Spartan maidens weaving garlands of spring flowers. And though she lived in comfort and respect, sometimes she felt a soft ache in her heart, a longing for something she could not name. Not sadness, not emptiness, just a quiet sense that the world was turning, slowly, towards something unseen. One morning, news arrived at the Spartan court. An envoy from Troy had come to visit a young prince sent across the sea to strengthen bonds between the kingdoms. His name was Paris. He entered the palace with the calm confidence of someone raised among nature's beauty, tall, graceful, gentle in manner. His eyes held the softness of distant hills. His movements were light, as though he belonged not to stone halls but to open meadows and singing streams. He bowed before Menelaus and spoke with respect. His voice was quiet, musical, touched by the cadence of mountain winds. The Spartan king welcomed him warmly, unaware of the threads of destiny already tightening around them. Helen saw Paris from across the hall, just a single glance, a moment brief as the flicker of a candle, and yet something stirred within her. Not desire, not recognition, but something far more delicate. A faint warmth blooming behind her ribs, a whisper carried by the gods, a soft pull like the tide responding to a distant moon. Paris lifted his eyes toward her. The world around him seemed to fade. His breath slowed. A quiet awe filled him, soft and overwhelming. Aphrodite had promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, and in that instant, he understood. Not through thought, but through the gentle shock of the heart. This was the woman the goddess had spoken of, Helen, Queen of Sparta, the living embodiment of elegance. But nothing was spoken. No vow, no confession. Only a shared moment, a stillness, a flutter, a silent recognition that their lives had shifted. A change subtle as the first ripple on a quiet lake. Helen greeted Paris with the courtesy of a queen. Her words were polite, measured, warm. But as she spoke, she felt a faint trembling beneath her calm, a sense that the air around her had lightened, as though invisible wings brushed the space between them. Aphrodite's influence was gentle, soft as rose petals drifting on the breeze. Helen did not feel desire. She felt possibility, something opening like a secret door inside her chest. Paris was invited to stay in the palace during his diplomatic visit. Days passed, unhurried. He walked through Spartan gardens, admiring the olive trees twisting like ancient guardians. He watched competitions in the training fields, impressed by the discipline of Spartan warriors. He dined at Menelaus' table, speaking of Troy, of the mountains he loved, of the flocks he once tended, and through it all, Helen found her gaze returning to him, quietly, curiously, as though drawn by a soft magnetic thread. Paris did not pursue her. He did not speak boldly. He did not break courtesy. But whenever their eyes met, something warm and fragile flickered between them, a delicate, shimmering thread, woven by a goddess who understood the human heart more intimately than any mortal ever could. Then, one morning, the palace grew heavy with an unexpected silence. A messenger arrived breathless with news from Crete. Menelaus' grandfather had passed away. The king must sail immediately to attend the funeral rites. He would be gone for several days. He placed the palace and his guests in Helen's charge. He trusted her wisdom. He trusted Paris. He trusted the oath sworn by every Greek king, never imagining how thin oaths can become when brushed by the wings of fate. When Menelaus departed, the palace felt different. The hallways echoed with a softer quiet. The torches burned lower. The air seemed warmer, touched by Aphrodite's unseen breath. Paris walked through the courtyard that evening. The sky was turning violet. The first stars blinked awake, and Helen stepped onto the balcony overlooking the gardens. Their eyes met again, but this time neither looked away. Helen descended the steps. Her gown whispered around her ankles like soft moonlit waves. Paris bowed his head, but when he lifted it again, the emotion in his eyes was gentle, deep, and unhidden. Helen felt a calm settle over her, as though the world had paused its turning, as though destiny itself held its breath. They walked through the garden in silence at first. Then, with words soft, careful, curious, like two streams gently running into one another, they spoke of Troy, of Sparta, of what it meant to feel out of place even in the home you grew up in. They spoke of dreams, of longing, of the quiet ache that lives in every human heart, the ache for something just out of reach. Helen found herself laughing softly at his stories. Paris found comfort in her gentleness. And though neither spoke of love, the feeling grew around them, light, invisible, inevitable. Aphrodite watched from afar, smiling with quiet satisfaction. She did not force their hearts. She only guided them, nudged them, opened the door so their souls could meet. But destiny was already turning, and when the moment came, it was like the soft shift of a tide. One night, the moon hung full and bright above Sparta. The sea reflected its glow in shimmering waves. Paris stood on the shore, looking out across the water, lost in thoughts he could not untangle. Helen walked toward him, drawn as though by a pull of nature itself. She stood beside him silently. The breeze brushed her hair, the waves murmured against the sand, and the world felt suspended in silver light. Paris turned to her. He spoke her name softly, Helen, and she felt her heart tremble. Not with fear, but with recognition, with a sense of coming home to something she had never known she had lost. He told her, quietly, that he could not remain, that the pull of destiny had grown too strong, that he felt, with every breath, that she was meant to be part of his future, a future waiting across the sea. Helen did not answer at once. She closed her eyes, listened to the whispers of the ocean, listened to the soft hum beneath her ribs, listened to the faint breath of Aphrodite, warm as summer wind. She felt no fear, only a quiet certainty that the life she knew was not the life she was meant to keep, that the path unfolding before her was the one woven for her since birth. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. As the moon follows the tide, she said, "So must I follow my heart." And in that moment, the choice was made. Paris reached for her hand, their fingers intertwined like two threads finally meeting. The waves curled softly around their feet. The wind carried the scent of distant seas, and under the silver watch of the moon, they walked toward the waiting ship. The deck creaked beneath their steps. The sails unfurled with a whisper like wings opening. The ropes groaned softly as the breeze caught hold. And slowly, gently, the ship drifted away from Sparta. The sea was calm. The water glimmered with moonlit ripples. Helen stood at the rail, the wind brushing her face like a tender hand. Paris stood beside her, the warmth of his presence steady and quiet. Neither spoke. Words were not needed. The world around them moved with serene certainty. The moonlit waves murmured. The stars shimmered. The night wrapped them in a soft embrace. Destiny was carrying them forward, not with violence, not with betrayal, but with the quiet inevitability of a tide returning to shore. Aphrodite guided the wind, the moon guided the waves, and fate guided their hearts. Helen looked back only once. Sparta grew smaller in the distance. Its torches dimmed. Its mountains faded into shadows. She felt a soft pang in her chest, not regret, but a tender farewell to a life she had outgrown. Paris stepped beside her. His voice was warm and low. "I do not know what awaits us," he whispered, "but whatever it is, we face it together." Helen nodded. her eyes reflecting the sea. The future was uncertain, the path ahead was long, but she felt strangely calm, safe, aligned with something larger than herself. The ship continued across the Aegean Sea, moving under the guidance of stars older than memory. The water shimmered around them, dark and deep and beautiful. Waves whispered against the hull. The sails fluttered softly. The night carried their breath into the quiet distance. And far away, Troy waited, a city of marble towers and ancient walls, a city unaware of the story already drifting toward it on moonlit waters, a story of love, a story of destiny, a story that would be remembered for thousands of years. But for now, in this chapter, in this tender moment, in this silver-lit night, there is only the sea, only the wind, only two hearts carried gently toward their fate. And the story of Troy moves quietly forward. The moonlit ship carrying Paris and Helen drifted deeper into the Aegean night. Behind them, Sparta faded into a distant shimmer of firelight and memory. Ahead of them, the stars turned slowly over the dark sea, as though guiding them along a thread of fate. But for every destiny gained, another destiny stirs awake. And now, far away from the quiet waves and the silver winds, a king was waking to an empty palace, and the world began to tremble softly, quietly as the first notes of war entered the air. Menelaus returned from Crete at dawn. His ship glided into the harbor beneath sunrise skies, pale gold and gentle as early morning breath. The sea was calm, the air was cool. But the moment he stepped onto Spartan soil, he felt something new in the wind, a stillness, an unease, a silence that did not belong. He walked through the palace gates, expecting to hear Helen's laughter echo softly through the marble halls, expecting to see her standing at the balcony, waiting for him, expecting the familiar warmth of home. But the palace was empty. Her footsteps were gone. Her presence no longer filled the chambers like soft perfume in the air. The servants bowed deeply, their eyes lowered, trembling with the weight of words they could not yet speak. And Menelaus knew before even hearing the truth that life had shifted. He asked gently at first, then with urgency, then with the trembling breath of a man whose heart has already broken, though he tries to deny it. At last, the truth was spoken. Helen was gone. Paris was gone. The Trojan ship had slipped into the night and vanished into the endless blue. Menelaus stood still. He did not shout. He did not curse. He did not rage. Instead, a soft quiet settled over him. A quiet, so deep it felt like a stone sinking into water. His voice, when it came, was not loud with fury but low, steady, heavy with sorrow. "I trusted him," he whispered. "I welcomed him into my home, and he has taken the light of my life." He walked slowly to the balcony where Helen had once stood. He laid his hand upon the stone railing. The morning wind rose gently, touching his face like a sigh. And there, beneath the pale sunrise, Menelaus allowed a single grief-stricken tear to fall, not for betrayal, but for the quiet wound left behind when someone beloved disappears into the dark. But grief is never alone. Honor walks beside it. Pride, duty, vows sealed by kings long before this moment. And Menelaus remembered the sacred oath, the oath sworn by every Greek ruler who had once sought Helen's hand. A promise to protect her marriage, a promise to defend her husband, a promise that now called all of Greece to act. Menelaus straightened slowly. The softness in his eyes sharpened. The sorrow became resolve. He turned from the balcony and walked purposefully through the palace halls. His first destination was Mycenae, the kingdom of his brother, a king whose ambition was matched only by his authority, Agamemnon. The palace of Mycenae rose like a lion crouching on the hilltop. Its golden walls reflected the midday sun in bright waves. The great lion gate towered above all who approached, carved with ancient symbols of power, and within its halls, Agamemnon stood as the mightiest ruler of Greece. When Menelaus arrived, Agamemnon greeted him with the embrace of a brother, warm, firm, protective. But the moment he saw Menelaus' face, he felt the tremor of sorrow radiating through him. He listened in silence as Menelaus spoke, how Paris had been welcomed, how Helen had vanished, how destiny had shifted in a single night. And Agamemnon, ruler of countless armies, did not hesitate. He placed his hand upon Menelaus' shoulder. His voice deepened with a solemn promise. "Brother," he said softly, "you will not face this grief alone. We will call upon every king who swore the oath, and together we will restore your honor. We will bring Helen home." And so the great call went out across Greece, a call carried by swift runners, by riders racing across dusty plains, by ships cutting through the bright blue sea, a call reaching every corner of the Greek world, a call to gather, to unite, to answer the oath sworn long ago. The first to arrive was Nestor, the wise old king of Pylos. He came riding calmly in his chariot, his long white beard flowing like river foam in the wind. His eyes held the depth of many years, and his voice carried the softness of one who has seen war, sorrow, and the cycles of time. He greeted Menelaus with a gentle bow. "My king," he said, "your pain is known to every land, and every land will rise beside you." He spoke slowly, each word like a stone placed carefully upon the earth, steady and sure. The presence of Nestor alone brought comfort, for wisdom often soothes where power does not. Next came Ajax of Salamis, a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and strong, with a voice that rolled across the fields like distant thunder. His steps shook the stones of Mycenae. He carried a shield so massive that lesser warriors could hardly lift it, yet he moved with the gentleness of a mountain wind. When he approached Menelaus, he placed his enormous hand upon the king's shoulder. "Show me the enemy," he said simply, "and I will stand between him and every sorrow he tries to bring you again." Then came Diomedes of Argos, sharp-eyed and steadfast, and the twins Castor and Pollux, Helen's own brothers, their faces set with quiet determination, and many others, each one answering the ancient vow with loyalty, with honor, with the calm resolve of men who understood the weight of destiny. But one name stirred greater anticipation than all others: Odysseus, king of Ithaca, master of clever minds, beloved by Athena, a man whose wisdom could shape nations. When the heralds reached Ithaca, Odysseus was sitting beside his wife, Penelope, cradling their newborn son. The baby slept peacefully, his tiny fingers curled like soft petals against his father's chest. Odysseus looked down at the child, at Penelope's serene face, and felt his heart wrapped in the quiet warmth of home. He did not wish to leave. He did not wish to fight. He did not wish to abandon the life he had just begun. So when the heralds called him to Mycenae, Odysseus feigned madness. He yoked an ox and a donkey together, an absurd pairing, and began plowing the fields with salt instead of grain. His eyes were wide, unfocused, his movements erratic. He muttered nonsense to no one at all. The heralds hesitated. They had been told he was clever, but this looked like a man who had completely lost his senses. They were ready to leave, until Palamedes, a sharp-minded noble among them, noticed something strange. Penelope stood nearby holding the infant. Her eyes were calm, too calm for a woman whose husband had suddenly gone mad. Palamedes stepped forward. He gently lifted the infant from her arms, and without a word, he placed the child directly in the path of the plow. In an instant, Odysseus stopped. His body froze. His eyes cleared. He dropped the plow's handles and rushed to lift his son safely into his arms. And so the truth was revealed. His madness had been nothing but a mask. Odysseus sighed. knowing that fate had caught up with him. He looked down at his child, he pressed a kiss to his forehead, and with sorrowful resignation, he turned to prepare for the journey ahead. His ship sailed toward Mycenae, and when he arrived at the gathering of kings, he was greeted with quiet, knowing smiles. Some admired his cleverness, others laughed softly at the attempt, but all welcomed him. With Odysseus came strategy, planning, cunning, a mind capable of turning impossible odds into victory. But the gathering was not complete, not yet. There was still one more man whose presence was necessary, a man feared across the world, a man whose name was spoken with awe, Achilles, son of Peleus, son of Thetis, born with a destiny wrapped around him like golden armor. The kings knew the truth. Without Achilles, the war could not be won. But Achilles was hidden, concealed by his mother, Thetis, who knew the prophecy of his fate. If he fought at Troy, he would never return home. So she carried him to the island of Skyros, to the palace of King Lycomedes, and disguised him as a girl among the king's daughters. Achilles wore flowing robes of pale silk. His hair was braided with delicate ribbons. He moved with a grace that fooled every eye except perhaps those trained in the art of seeing through illusion. Odysseus, the clever king, was chosen to find him. He traveled to Skyros with a chest of gifts, jewelry, perfumed oils, fine combs, delicate bracelets, and at the very bottom of the chest a single sword, a warrior's blade, sharp, bright, tempting. He entered the palace, bowing before the king. The daughters gathered, curious to see what the visitor had brought. Odysseus opened the chest with a flourish. The girls gasped softly. Their hands reached for the beautiful ornaments. Their laughter filled the room like soft bells. But one girl in the corner watched not the jewelry, but the sword. Her eyes flickered toward it, lingering, drawn, as though something deep within her recognized its purpose. Odysseus observed quietly. He said nothing, but inside, he smiled. Then he signaled one of his men outside. Suddenly, a loud shout echoed through the palace halls. "Pirates! Pirates have breached the gates!" Screams followed. Noble women fled, daughters scattered, hiding behind pillars. But not Achilles. The disguised youth leapt to his feet. His hand flashed toward the sword. He lifted it with the confidence of one born to battle. His eyes sharpened. His stance hardened. He looked like a warrior carved from bronze and fire. And Odysseus stepped forward, smiling gently. "Lady," he said softly, "your disguise has fallen." Achilles froze. Their eyes met, and he knew he had been found. The room fell silent. The charade dissolved. Achilles removed the ribbons from his hair. The silk garments seemed suddenly heavy, out of place. He stood tall, strong, unmistakable. Odysseus approached him slowly. "Greece needs you," he said. "The world calls you. The songs of destiny wait for your name." Achilles did not answer immediately. He thought of his mother, of the prophecy, of the short life that awaited him if he went to war. But he also thought of glory, of honor, of the fire in his heart that yearned for the meaning found only in great deeds. He lifted the sword. Its blade caught the sunlight, gleaming like a promise. "I will go," he whispered. And fate stirred once more. With Achilles found, the gathering of kings was complete. In Mycenae, Agamemnon stood before the assembled rulers. His voice echoed across the great courtyard. "This is not merely the matter of one man's grief," he said. "It is the matter of honor, of oaths sworn, of unity. Our strength lies not in one kingdom, but in all kingdoms standing as one." Nestor nodded solemnly. Ajax crossed his arms, his expression firm. Odysseus' eyes gleamed with knowing resolve, and Achilles, standing beneath the sunlight, felt destiny settle on his shoulders like a mantle woven by the gods. Then Agamemnon gave the command, "Prepare the ships," and Greece awakened. Along every coastline, men sharpened spears. Mothers wove cloaks for their sons. Fathers embraced their children. The harbors filled with movement. Craftsmen shaped hulls. Carpenters raised masts. Sailors hauled ropes and barrels and shields. The air rang with the rhythm of preparation. Hammer strikes, shouted orders, creaking wood, the scent of pine resin mixed with sea spray. Odysseus stood on the shore of Ithaca, watching the sails being lifted. Achilles strode through the encampments, his presence stirring courage in every soldier who saw him. Nestor blessed the young warriors with gentle hands. Ajax tested the strength of every rope, making sure no part of the journey would fail. Diomedes trained his men beneath the bright sky, each movement steady and purposeful. And slowly, as days passed, a sight emerged upon the Greek horizon, a sight that poets would speak of for thousands of years, a sight that glimmered like wings, 1,000 ships, their sails unfurled like the feathers of enormous white birds. The masts rose toward the sky like forest trunks. The oars dipped in slow synchronicity, moving with the grace of the tide. The vast fleet stretched across the sea, row after row, line after line, an armada so immense that the coastline itself seemed to tremble with anticipation. From above, it must have looked like a migration of giant seabirds, gliding together toward a distant shore. A flock of warriors carried not by instinct but by destiny, moving not toward prey but toward history. Menelaus stood at the front of his ship. The wind brushed his hair. His expression was solemn but steady. He had lost Helen, but he had gained the strength of an entire nation. Agamemnon stood beside him, his gaze fierce and resolute. Achilles leaned against the rail of his vessel, sea spray glistening on his armor. Odysseus sat thoughtfully at the bow of his ship, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though reading every ripple of water like a line of prophecy. And the fleet sailed forward. The Aegean Sea opened before them like a great scroll unrolling. Sunlight danced upon the waves. Seabirds cried overhead. The sails snapped gently in the breeze. And every man aboard felt the pull of destiny deep within his bones, quiet, constant, undeniable. The oars dipped. The ships glided. And the world watched. The gathering of kings had begun. A moment that would echo far beyond Greece, far beyond Troy, far beyond the lifetime of any mortal who stepped upon those ships. For now, in this calm beginning, the fleet moved like a dream, silent, orderly, majestic, 1,000 white sails drifting across a sea of blue. And the story of Troy moved closer with every gentle stroke of the oars. The story moves gently now, not with the thunder of battle, not with cries of war, but with the slow and quiet breath of passing years. Years that drift like pale dust in the sunlight. Years that fall like grains of sand in an endless hourglass. Years that wrap themselves around Troy and the Greek encampments like a soft, unending mist. 10 years, 10 long, quiet years. And yet, they slip by as softly as a dream. When Paris and Helen arrived at Troy, the city greeted them with warmth and confusion. Some rejoiced at the sight of Helen's beauty. Some whispered of omens and shadows. But the city itself, its walls, its towers, its winds, accepted her quietly, like the sea accepting a new river. And for a while, life continued as though nothing had changed. The world remained still, but soon, sails appeared on the horizon. White sails, many sails, a whisper first, then a rumor, then a truth carried by trembling voices. The Greeks had come, not as merchants, not as travelers, but as a tide that had risen across the sea, a tide that did not recede. The armies landed, they set up camp on the sandy shores, they built huts, dug trenches, lit fires each night beneath unfamiliar constellations. But though their arrival marked the beginning of a siege, the first year was strangely quiet. There were no great battles, no thunderous assault, only waiting, watching. A slow settling of two worlds facing each other across a thin stretch of earth. Time flowed. The first year drifted into the second softened into the third melted into the fourth. Seasons changed like the breath of the gods, warm, cold, warm again. But the walls of Troy remained standing, tall and unbroken, and the Greek ships remained anchored, their masts rising like a forest of still, silent trees. In the Greek camp, Achilles walked along the shoreline at dawn, not as a warrior hungry for glory, but as a young man listening to the rhythm of the waves. Each morning, he stood barefoot at the water's edge. He felt the foam curl around his ankles. He watched the horizon slowly brighten with the colors of awakening light. He was the greatest warrior of his age, yet here, at the edge of the sea, he was simply a soul in the quiet of early morning. Ajax, towering and broad as a stone wall, often sat nearby sharpening his spearheads, but even he sharpened slowly, gently, as though the metal might break if rushed. He watched the ships bob calmly in the harbor. He listened to the gulls cry overhead. His strength was immense, yet his heart held patience, a patience shaped by years of waiting without purpose. Odysseus spent long hours creating plans, maps, charts, strategies. But even he began to understand that this war was not a storm, it was a tide that rose and fell with no urgency, a tide that could not be forced. Across the plain, inside the safety of Troy's high walls, Hector moved through the city like a steady flame. He listened to the concerns of fathers. He raised the spirits of young men. He guided the hands of builders repairing the fortifications. Each night, he returned home. He sat beside Andromache. He kissed his son, Astyanax, on the forehead, and he whispered to them quietly of hope. Not of triumph, not of fear, just hope soft and warm as a blanket pulled across a sleeping child. Helen spent many hours at the highest balcony of the palace, a balcony facing the sea. She watched the horizon where the Greek ships stood like silent phantoms. She watched the waves rise and fall below. She watched the colors of daylight shift across the water from gold to silver to deep blue. Her heart carried guilt, sorrow, longing, and love all at once. Yet she made no dramatic gestures. She simply watched, day after day, as though searching for something in the distance that only she could see. Priam, the aging king of Troy, prayed in the temple each morning. He walked slowly beneath the tall marble columns. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the altar. His voice was soft, thin, worn by years. He prayed not for victory but for endurance, for peace, for understanding. He prayed for the safety of his children, for the future of his city, for the gods to show mercy upon a world caught between love and duty. Cassandra, the prophetess cursed to be unheard, wandered the palace halls with distant eyes. She whispered of shadows approaching, of threads of fate darkening. But her voice was thin, like wind slipping through cracks in the stone. And no one listened. Not because they doubted her, but because the years had made her warnings feel like part of the palace walls. Always present, never alarming. Paris moved like a man caught between relief and burden. He tended to Helen with gentle devotion. He walked through Troy's gardens with her, speaking softly of beauty, of love, of music. But each time he saw the Greek ships on the horizon, something in his chest grew heavy. He felt the weight of choices he could no longer undo. Yet he never spoke of regret. He simply carried it like a shadow at his heels. And so the years continued. The 5th year came quietly, like the slow turn of a star. The Greek camp built stronger huts. They planted small gardens to pass the time. Children were eventually born, their tiny sparks of life in a place meant for war. Women from nearby lands joined the camp. Merchants occasionally drifted along the coastline with goods and news. It no longer felt like an army. It felt like a wandering village that had chosen to settle beside Troy, unable to return home, unable to advance. The Trojans, too, adapted to the long waiting. They repaired their walls repeatedly. They crafted new shields and spears. But they also continued their festivals. They honored their gods. They married. They celebrated births. They mourned losses unrelated to war, losses brought simply by the natural passage of time. Life persisted in the shadow of a siege. Not loud, not violent, simply present. The 6th year passed like a long breath, the 7th like a drifting cloud, the 8th like a leaf falling gently from an autumn tree. And all the while, the two worlds remained locked in a stillness so deep it felt like the world itself had forgotten to turn. Achilles grew restless at times, but even his restlessness softened. He wrote songs by the fire. He played the lyre late at night, his voice low and somber. He thought often of home, of his father, of his mother's embrace, but he also found comfort in the rituals of the camp, the rhythm of repeated days, the camaraderie of warriors, the soft laughter around shared meals. Ajax lifted stones each morning, not in preparation for war, but to keep his strength. He trained the younger soldiers, teaching them patience more than aggression. Odysseus sat beneath the shade of his ship's hull, carving small wooden figurines, birds, boats, faces of men he remembered and men he missed. The years softened even the sharpest edges of his mind. Back in Troy, Hector's son grew. Astyanax learned to walk, to speak, to run toward Hector with tiny arms outstretched. And each time Hector lifted him high into the air, the child laughed a bright, pure sound like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Andromache watched them with a mixture of joy and quiet fear. She knew destiny moved slowly, like a shadow lengthening across the floor, but she cherished every moment of peace, holding them close to her heart. Helen's days remained gentle. She read scrolls in the palace gardens. She fed doves in the courtyard. She embroidered delicate patterns into soft cloth. But always, always she returned to the balcony facing the sea, her eyes searching the waves, not for rescue, not for judgment, but for understanding, as though the sea carried answers she had not yet learned to hear. Priam aged visibly. Each passing season left new lines on his face, new tremors in his hands, but his spirit remained strong. He walked the city walls every evening. He spoke softly to the guards. He pressed blessings into the palms of children. And he prayed. Always he prayed. Cassandra's warnings continued, soft, unheeded, flowing like forgotten poetry through the palace halls. Some nights she wept quietly in the temple. Some nights she sat beneath the moonlight, her eyes unfocused, seeing futures that others refused to see. But the years dulled even her urgency, not because the visions stopped, but because she knew the weight of inevitability. Paris grew quieter as the years passed. He trained with the younger warriors. He walked the palace gardens with Helen. He carried the weight of choices he could not undo, but he also carried love. A love that remained gentle and constant, even as time slowly eroded the world around him. The 9th year arrived like a long sigh. By now, the Greeks and Trojans had grown used to the presence of each other, used to the sight of ships on the horizon, used to the echo of distant campfires. A strange kind of coexistence hung in the air. Not peace, not war, something in between. something suspended, something dreamlike. Children born in Troy had never known life without the Greeks. Children born in the Greek camp had never seen their homeland. Some of them sat on the walls and stared across the plains with curiosity, wondering what lay beyond the lives they had always known. Time had softened everything: fears, anger, ambition, purpose. All that remained was waiting, an endless waiting, a waiting that wrapped itself around every heart, every home, every breath. And then came the 10th year, the final year before destiny awakened. But in this chapter, in this long drifting dream, that awakening does not come yet. Here, the 10th year unfolds gently, like the petals of a slow blooming flower. The Greeks watched the sea, the Trojans watched the sky, and the world watched both. Achilles walked the shoreline one evening, the setting sun painting the water with rose gold light. He dipped his hand into the sea, feeling the cool currents slip between his fingers. He whispered to the waves a thought he could not speak aloud. "Why are we here?" The sea answered him only with its eternal rhythm. Ajax stood beside a fire, turning a small wooden horse in his hand, a toy crafted by a young boy in the camp. He smiled quietly at the craftsmanship. Strength did not make him immune to tenderness. Nestor sat near the temple, telling stories to the younger men, stories of times long past, times long forgotten. His voice flowed like warm honey, slow and comforting. Odysseus dreamed of Penelope. He saw her weaving by lamplight. He saw his son taking his first steps. He awoke each morning with a sigh that carried both love and longing. In Troy, Hector taught Astyanax to read simple symbols carved in soft clay. The boy pressed his small fingers into the marks, giggling each time he recognized a shape. Andromache braided her husband's hair with quiet affection, smoothing it behind his ear. Helen read ancient poetry aloud beneath the olive trees. Her voice drifted through the leaves like a gentle breeze. Priam walked the walls, leaning upon his staff, blessing each soldier with a solemn nod. Cassandra sat by the window, her eyes half closed, whispering soft prophecies the wind carried away. And Paris stood on the highest terrace of the palace, looking out toward the sea. His face was calm, but his heart was a complicated place. A garden of love, a garden of guilt, a garden of choices, a garden of memories. He reached up and touched the soft curls of his hair, as though feeling the weight of years that had passed too slowly and too quickly all at once. And the 10th year drifted on, days passing like waves, nights passing like shadows, the world suspended in stillness. It is said that great wars are made of battle and bloodshed. But the truth is simpler, softer. Great wars are made of waiting, waiting that shapes the soul, waiting that wears down the heart, waiting that feels endless, dreamlike, unreal. 10 years. 10 long, drifting, dreamlike years. And though the story will soon turn, though destiny will soon awaken, though the quiet of these years will soon give way to the great tides of fate, for now, the world remains still. For now, the world breathes slowly. For now, the world sleeps beneath the blanket of time, like a dream that refuses to end, like a sigh that lingers on the air, like a song sung so softly it becomes part of the silence. 10 years have passed, and the story of Troy moves quietly into the next chapter. The 10th year had settled across the Greek encampment like a soft, gray blanket. The days drifted through the camp with gentle monotony. The sea sighed endlessly against the shore, and the sky hung low, heavy with unspoken thoughts. The world felt quiet, distant, dreamlike, as though it were suspended in a deep breath that no one dared to release. But beneath the surface of that long stillness, small tensions had begun to grow, not the loud, violent kind, not the kind that echoes through halls or shakes the ground, but the soft kind, the kind that forms like a hairline crack in stone, invisible at first, slow, patient, and destined to widen. Achilles felt it before anyone else. A subtle shifting in the air, a heaviness in his chest during dawn, a restlessness in his limbs that morning songs and evening fires could no longer calm. For 10 years he had waited with the others, but patience was not his nature. He was made of fire, of wind, of the wild pulse of life. And though the siege had lulled into a long sleep, something inside him remained awake, watching, listening, waiting for the moment when destiny would call his name once more. Patroclus saw this growing unrest. He watched Achilles with quiet, understanding eyes. Because no one in the entire Greek camp knew Achilles' heart better than Patroclus. He was not merely a friend, not merely a companion. He was the gentle shadow that followed Achilles' flame, the calm to his storm, the soft place Achilles rested when the world felt too heavy. Their bond ran deeper than words, deeper than shared battles, deeper than the laughter they had once traded in their youth. It was a connection woven from childhood memories, shared silences, and the soft trust of two souls who had walked alongside each other for years before destiny had whispered their names. When Achilles' anger rose, Patroclus soothed it. When Achilles' pride grew, Patroclus softened it. When Achilles felt the weight of prophecy, Patroclus held him steady. Where Achilles was bright and fierce, Patroclus was warm and gentle. They were two halves of a single calm breath, two stars that moved in tandem across the dark. But fate, ever patient, ever watching, had begun to move its quiet hand. The tension that Achilles felt finally took form in a single, simple conflict. A misunderstanding between Achilles and Agamemnon. A clash of pride, two wills too strong, too stubborn, too ancient in spirit to bend. Agamemnon demanded something Achilles would not give. Achilles spoke words he could not take back. And so, the greatest warrior of the Greek world stepped away from the battlefield. He laid down his spear. He folded away his armor. He returned to his hut at the edge of the camp, and he refused to fight. It was not a loud rebellion, not a violent one, but a quiet removal of light. When Achilles withdrew, the camp dimmed, as though the fire at the heart of the army had gone out, as though the sea itself sighed in disappointment. Patroclus followed him, not to convince him, not to challenge him, but simply to sit beside him as he rested in the shade of his solitude. Achilles lay on a blanket near the shoreline as the afternoon light faded. The waves curled gently around his feet. His golden hair spilled across the sand like threads of sunlight. Patroclus sat beside him, elbows resting on his knees, eyes watching the slow rhythm of the sea. He did not speak. He knew that words at moments like these only clutter the heart. Achilles sighed deeply. His voice was soft, almost fragile. "I feel trapped," he murmured, "like a caged flame." Patroclus watched the horizon. "It is only a feeling," he said gently, "and feelings pass, like clouds." Achilles closed his eyes. "I am meant for something more. I can feel it. Here." He placed a hand over his chest, like a child pressing a palm against a window, wanting to see beyond the glass. Patroclus smiled faintly. "You are always meant for more, Achilles. Even the gods know that." Achilles breathed again, slow, deep, a breath heavy with restless longing. "Do you think the world will forget me if I do nothing?" Patroclus shook his head softly. "No one forgets the sun," he said, "even when it hides behind clouds." The evening fell quietly around them. The sea darkened. The first stars shimmered overhead, and Achilles felt Patroclus' presence like a warm blanket laid across his spirit. For a time, the world was peaceful. But peace, like all things, does not last forever. One morning, the sound of distant movement reached the edge of Achilles' camp. Not loud, not frantic, but steady, rhythmic, like the beat of many feet moving in unison. Patroclus stood outside the hut, pulling on a simple cloak as he looked toward the plains. "Achilles," he said softly, Something is happening. Achilles stepped out into the cool morning air. He felt the faint tremor in the earth beneath him. He heard the distant rumble of shields. His heart tightened, not with fear, but with the old, familiar pull of destiny. The Greek army was preparing for battle, without Achilles. He watched in silence as rows of men marched forward. Their spears glinted in the rising sun. Their sandals brushed the grass in long waves. Dust lifted gently behind them, drifting into the sky like incense. Achilles felt the ache in his chest deepen. The war was moving forward without him. His men were marching into danger. His friends, his brothers in arms, his comrades all walked into the unknown while he stood in stillness. Patroclus saw the turmoil in his eyes. He spoke softly. "You care for them." Achilles exhaled slowly. "Yes," he whispered. "But I cannot fight for a king who does not respect me." Patroclus nodded. He understood. He always understood. But as the days passed, the Greek camp became heavier. The soldiers returned with injuries. The healers' huts filled with groans and quiet prayers. War, which had once been a distant possibility, now crept close to the heart of the encampment. Patroclus walked among the wounded. He offered water. He washed dirt from their faces. He listened as they spoke of fear. He placed quiet hands upon trembling shoulders, and each night he returned to Achilles with eyes heavy with sorrow. "They look to your hut," Patroclus said gently, as though waiting for a star to rise. Achilles did not answer. His silence was deep, deep as the sea, deep as the sky before a storm. What broke him, what shifted the quiet balance, was the sight of the Myrmidons, his own soldiers, his brothers, sitting quietly outside their tents, staring at the ground, fearful, leaderless, lost. Achilles felt something inside him twist, but pride is a stubborn shadow. It clings, it holds fast, it narrows vision. Patroclus watched Achilles struggle against himself, against the threads of fate tightening around him, against the weight of choices woven long before he was born. And then came a morning when the camp woke to an unusual silence. A silence too thick, too heavy, too unnatural. Patroclus stepped outside. The sky was gray. The air was cool with the promise of rain. He walked toward the center of the camp, where soldiers gathered in trembling clusters. A messenger approached him, his face pale, his breath unsteady. "The Trojans push forward," he whispered. "They are close. Too close." Patroclus glanced toward Achilles' hut. He felt the weight of decision settling upon him, soft, inevitable, like a hand placed gently on his shoulder. That night, rain began to fall. Slow at first, soft, gentle. 1,000 tiny drops touching the earth like fingers of a sleeping god. Achilles sat beside the fire, staring into the flames. Patroclus watched him with quiet sorrow, knowing the choice he must make. But he approached slowly, delicately, with the tenderness one uses when waking someone from a deep sleep. "Achilles," he said. The name drifted through the rain-soaked air. Achilles did not look up, but Patroclus knelt beside him. His voice remained soft. "Let me wear your armor." Achilles inhaled sharply. The fire crackled. The rain thickened. Patroclus continued, "If the Myrmidons see your armor, their courage will rise. If the Trojans see it, they will fall back. I will not seek glory. I will not seek blood. I will only drive them away from the ships." Achilles' heart twisted painfully. "No," he whispered. "It is too dangerous." Patroclus gently placed a hand over Achilles. "You are choosing pride over their lives." The words struck deeply. Achilles flinched. Patroclus softened his tone. "I do not ask for a hero's place. I only ask for a chance to save them." Achilles closed his eyes. He felt torn in two between love and honor, between pride and compassion. At last he nodded, but very slowly, very reluctantly. "You may wear my armor," he said softly, "but promise me you will not chase glory. Promise me you will return to me." Patroclus smiled, a small, warm smile, a smile filled with affection older than war. "I promise," he whispered. Achilles placed his hand over Patroclus' heart. The rain pattered around them, the fire glowed softly, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Achilles helped him put on the armor, piece by piece, strap by strap. The golden plates glimmered in the firelight like fragments of a fallen sun. Patroclus transformed. He looked like Achilles, moved like Achilles, shone like Achilles. But his eyes, Patroclus' gentle eyes, could not be disguised. As he stepped into the rain, Achilles whispered, "Come back to me." The words floated through the mist. Patroclus heard them, carried them, cherished them. What happened next is not told in this chapter, not in detail, because this is a sleep story, a quiet story, one told not with violence, but with the soft weight of emotion and the gentle brush of fate. Patroclus moved across the plain like a golden echo. The Myrmidons followed him with renewed spirit. The Trojans, seeing the armor, fell back in fear, believing Achilles had returned. The Greeks rallied. The ships were spared. The tide shifted. But somewhere among that shifting tide, somewhere in the blur of sand and shadow, somewhere beneath the gray, rain-filled sky, Patroclus' promise could not be kept. He fell, quietly, softly, like a candle snuffed out by a gentle wind. The earth did not shake. The heavens did not roar. The world did not end. It simply dimmed. When the news reached Achilles, the night had grown darker, the rain heavier, the sea louder. A messenger stood before him, breathless, soaked, trembling. Achilles saw the truth in his eyes before the words were spoken. "No," Achilles whispered. But the world had already broken. The truth came anyway. Patroclus was gone. Achilles felt the sound leave his body, not a cry, not a scream, but a breath, a soft, collapsing breath, like the moment a wave breaks and slips back into the sea. He walked away from the messenger, away from the hut, away from the fire, away from everything but the soft pull of grief. He walked to the shoreline. The rain struck the water in delicate white rings. The wind moved in long, sorrowful sighs. The sea churned a quiet, restless blue. Achilles sat at the edge of the world. His armor lay untouched behind him. His hair clung to his skin. His hands trembled. He stared into the waves, not with anger, not with hate, but with a sorrow so deep, so old, so bottomless, that even the gods paused to listen. He whispered Patroclus' name. The sea carried it away. He whispered it again. The wind carried it too. There was no music, no drum beats, no thunder, only rain, and the small, fragile sound of Achilles' heart breaking. Hours passed, or moments, or lifetimes. Time lost meaning. The sea continued its eternal rhythm, waves rising, waves falling, waves reaching for the shore and slipping away again. Achilles remained unmoving, a figure carved from grief, a statue sculpted from sorrow. And then, when night had fully claimed the sky, a soft glow appeared behind him, footsteps gentle as snowfall approached. Thetis, his mother, sea-born, silver-haired, wrapped in the quiet luminescence of the deep ocean, she knelt beside him, placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was cool, calming, like moonlight resting on water. "My child," she whispered, though he was no longer a child, "your heart is heavy." Achilles did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the waves. "He was part of me," he said softly. Thetis nodded. "Yes, and you were part of him." Silence settled between them, woven of rain and grief, and the softness of morning. Then Thetis spoke again, her voice like a tide turning. "Stand up, Achilles." He did not move. She continued. "For sorrow must be met with purpose, and purpose must be carried with strength, and strength must be dressed in armor worthy of fate." Achilles turned slowly. Behind Thetis, shimmering in the rain, was a new set of armor, forged by the gods, shaped from celestial fires, bright as the first dawn. A breastplate glowing like polished starlight, greaves smooth as moonlit silver, a shield swirling with constellations, as though the night sky itself had been captured in bronze. Thetis lifted the armor with hands that trembled faintly, not with effort, but with sorrow. "This armor," she whispered, "is not to lift your grief, but to carry it." Achilles reached out. His fingers brushed the shield. It hummed softly beneath his touch. As though recognizing the hands of its destined bearer, he closed his eyes, and the rain washed gently across his face, mingling with tears he no longer tried to hide. Patroclus was gone. Achilles could not bring him back, but he could honor him. He could remember him. He could carry him in every breath, in every step, in every heartbeat. Achilles stood slowly, the sea behind him, the storm around him, the armor before him. And though the world remained wrapped in sorrow, a faint, trembling resolve began to rise. Not a fire, not a fury, not yet. Just a quiet shift, a soft awakening, a first, fragile step on a path shaped by love, by grief, by destiny. Achilles placed his hand upon his mother's. He whispered, "For him." Thetis nodded, and the armor glowed brighter, as though the heavens themselves had answered. But that is the next chapter, a chapter where sorrow becomes purpose, where purpose becomes destiny, where destiny becomes the quiet march of fate. For now, in this soft night, in this gentle rain, in this deep breath between loss and awakening, Achilles is simply a grieving heart beside a restless sea, and the story of Troy moves quietly into the storm. The storm of grief had not passed. It simply settled into Achilles like a quiet shadow, following each of his steps across the sand. Patroclus' name lingered on the wind, echoing through the endless waves, and though Achilles now wore the armor forged by the gods, the weight on his shoulders was heavier than bronze, heavier than destiny, heavier than anything he had ever carried. Across the plain, within the tall walls of Troy, Hector felt that change. He felt it in the trembling of the earth beneath his feet. He felt it in the wind brushing against his cheek. He felt it in the way the sky dimmed unnaturally at dawn, as though the world itself were bracing for something immense. Hector had always known the shape of his fate. He had felt it since childhood, a soft, distant certainty that one day he would stand alone at the threshold between life and death. And now that day approached, quiet as a whisper, heavy as a sigh. The sun dipped low over Troy. The sky glowed with the deep colors of late afternoon amber, rose, violet colors that seemed painted across the heavens by unseen hands. Hector walked slowly through the palace corridors, his footsteps soft upon the marble floors, his breath steady despite the tension coiling gently in his chest. He paused outside the doorway of his chamber. Inside, Andromache was sitting on the floor with their young son, Astyanax. The child laughed as he stacked small wooden blocks, then knocked them over with the bright, innocent delight only children possess. Andromache's gaze lifted when Hector entered. Her eyes held warmth and worry, and something deeper and knowing. "Hector," she whispered, as though speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile balance of the world. He knelt beside them. He placed his hand on Astyanax's tiny back, feeling the soft warmth of his son's breathing. Hector traced the child's curls with gentle fingers. In that moment, the noise of the city faded. The world shrank to this small room, this small family, this soft, fleeting moment. Andromache touched his cheek. Her thumb brushed the faint lines of exhaustion beneath his eyes. "You feel it too," she said softly. "Don't you?" Hector nodded. He did not lie. He never lied to her. "The winds have shifted," he murmured, "and the shadows follow me more closely than before." Tears gathered in Andromache's eyes. Not sudden, not dramatic, but slow, soft, like dew forming on morning leaves. "Stay," she whispered, "just tonight. Just until the dawn. The city will protect itself for a few hours more." Hector held her hand. His voice trembled barely, but enough for her to hear. "I would stay," he said. "In every heartbeat, I would choose to stay. But fate has asked for me, and I must answer." Andromache lowered her head. A tear fell silently onto Hector's hand. He brushed it away with a tenderness that seemed almost ancient. He lifted Astyanax into his arms. The child wrapped small fingers around Hector's armor strap. He giggled. He did not understand the heaviness of the moment, the weight of his father's breath, the quiet ache in his mother's heart. Hector pressed his forehead to his son's. "You will grow strong," he whispered. "You will grow kind. You will carry this city in your heart, wherever life leads you." He kissed the top of his son's head. Another quiet tear slipped from Andromache's lashes. Then Hector handed Astyanax gently back to her. He cupped her face between his hands. "I walk toward my destiny," he said softly. "But my heart stays here." Andromache leaned into his hands. "I will wait for you," she whispered, "even if the waiting breaks me." Hector kissed her one last time, a kiss soft and deep and filled with the weight of 1,000 silent promises. Then he turned and walked away, slow, deliberate, each step placing him closer to the moment fate had woven for him. Outside the palace, the air shifted. The wind moved through the city like a sigh. Hector's sandals brushed across the stone streets. Children paused. Old men bowed their heads. Mothers lifted their infants to their shoulders so they might witness the passing of Troy's greatest defender. No one spoke. No one needed to. Hector walked toward the gates. The sunlight stretched long across the ground, casting shadows that wavered like soft ribbons behind him. When he reached the great wooden doors, he placed a hand upon them. The wood was warm beneath his palm, alive, ancient, steady. He pushed them open. The world beyond was bathed in golden light. The plain stretched wide before him, still silent, painted with the soft hues of the dying day. And far across the field, Achilles emerged. He walked with the certainty of a man carved from light itself. His new armor shone with celestial glow, a brilliance so intense, so pure, that it seemed to illuminate the entire plain with its radiance. Each step he took left the faintest shimmer behind, as though the ground itself bowed in recognition. But his eyes did not shine. They were shadowed, heavy, filled with the quiet ache of a man carrying a grief too deep for words. Patroclus' name hung unspoken in every breath. Hector stepped forward. Achilles did the same. The space between them closed slowly, gradually, like two stars being drawn together by ancient gravity. The world held its breath. The wind fell silent. The birds quieted. Even the sea in the distance seemed to still, as though all creation paused to witness the meeting of two destinies crafted long before their births. The sun dipped lower. Its fading light cast long golden paths across the field. Hector stood within one path, Achilles within the other, light against light, shadow against shadow. Hector raised his gaze, and in that moment, he understood something profound. Achilles was not his enemy. Not in the way warriors often claim enemies. He was the other half of a divine equation, a necessary presence, a mirror of fate. Without Achilles, Hector's destiny would be incomplete. Without Hector, Achilles' grief would have no direction. They were two waves, shaped by the moon, drawn inevitably toward each other. Achilles spoke first. His voice was low, not angry, not loud, but trembling with sorrow. "You know why I'm here." Hector nodded slowly. "I do." The silence between them deepened. It was not hostile. It was reverent, sacred, like the hush that falls before a prayer is spoken. Hector placed his hand over his heart. "I am sorry for your friend," he said, soft as breath, soft as truth. He was brave. Achilles' jaw tightened. His fingers curled slightly, but his voice remained gentle. "And I am sorry for what must happen today." Hector breathed in deeply. The air tasted of dust and fading sunlight. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of the entire city behind him. When he opened them again, the fear was gone. Only resolve remained. "I am ready." The sky shifted. Clouds began to drift like slow-moving curtains across the sun. Light dimmed, shadows stretched. The world slipped into a muted twilight, a twilight neither living nor dying, but suspended. Achilles stepped forward. Hector stepped forward. The distance between them faded into nothing. But what happened next, what history remembers as a clash of titans, is not told here in noise or violence. This is a sleep story, a story of quiet truths, a story of souls, not swords. So the moment is told in images, in symbols, in the silent language of myth. Achilles became a streak of brilliant light, moving with the speed and sharpness of a falling star. Hector became a silhouette of deep earth, steady, grounded, unyielding. Light and shadow danced, touched, twisted together like two threads on a loom. Their steps echoed like distant drumbeats. Their breaths misted the cooling air. Their movements became blurs, sunlight clashing with dusk, morning meeting night. The ground beneath them felt their weight. The sky above them watched with solemn eyes. Time itself seemed to stretch. And then, quietly, softly, inevitably, Hector stumbled. A faint shift in balance. A soft exhale. A moment so gentle it felt like the turning of a page. He sank to his knees. The golden light around him dimmed. His breath grew shallow. Achilles stepped closer. But there was no triumph in his gaze, only sorrow, only the heavy ache of destiny fulfilled. Hector lifted his eyes. The last glimmer of sunlight reflected in them like fading embers. "Take care of my city," he whispered. "Take care of its memory." Achilles' throat tightened. "I will." Hector's gaze softened. "For my family," he murmured. "For my son." Achilles nodded. A single tear traced down his cheek, lost quickly in the dimming twilight. Hector exhaled one final time, a breath long and quiet, like the release of sorrow into the wind. And then he fell still. The world did not roar. The heavens did not tremble. The earth did not split. But something shifted. A soft tremor, a gentle ripple, a silent acknowledgement that a soul of immense courage had left the mortal world. Inside Troy, the city stirred. A collective shudder passed through its stones, its towers, its beating heart, not loud, not sharp, but deep. A resonance of grief felt by every spirit within its walls. In the palace, Andromache froze. Her breath caught. Her hands trembled. She did not need a messenger. Some part of her heart knew in the deepest, quietest place. A soft sob escaped her lips. She held Astyanax close, burying her face in his hair as though trying to protect him from a world forever changed. Priam, the old king, felt the shift too. He stood in the temple, his hand pressed to the altar, his eyes closed. A single tear slid down the lines of his weathered face. He whispered his son's name, so softly it barely existed. Hector. On the plain, Achilles stood over Hector's still form. He knelt slowly, He touched Hector's forehead with the back of his fingers. A gesture of respect, a gesture of grief, a gesture of farewell. Night descended fully now. The stars opened their small silver eyes. The air cooled into a gentle, solemn hush. Achilles remained beside Hector until the moon rose. Then he lifted the body, slowly, carefully, as though lifting something sacred. He brought Hector back to the Greek camp, not as a trophy, not as a symbol of victory, but as a fallen warrior deserving honor. That night, Achilles could not sleep. He stared out across the plain, thinking of Patroclus, thinking of Hector, thinking of the fragile line between love and loss. And then, in the quietest hour before dawn, a figure approached the Greek tents. An old man, clothed in simple garments, his steps slow but unwavering. Priam, the king of Troy, father of Hector, heart heavy with immeasurable sorrow. He entered Achilles' shelter with trembling hands. He knelt before the warrior who had taken his son. The gesture was so unexpected, so profound, that Achilles felt the breath leave his chest. Priam lifted his face. His eyes shone with grief, but also with dignity. "Achilles," he whispered, "give me back my child." The world paused, the sea still, the wind silent. Achilles' heart cracked open. He saw not a king, not an enemy, but a father broken by love, a father grieving the loss of a son, as Achilles grieved the loss of Patroclus. Achilles bowed his head, his voice trembled. "I am sorry," he whispered. He placed Hector's body gently into Priam's arms. The old king wept softly. Achilles wept with him. Two men from opposite worlds bound by the same grief. No war existed in that moment, no history, no destiny, only love, loss, and the quiet, timeless truth that even in the greatest of tragedies, human hearts can still touch. Priam carried Hector back to Troy. The city received him with candlelight and tears, and Achilles sat quietly in the darkness, watching the faint glow of torches flicker beyond the distant walls. The night held its breath. The world turned softly, and the story of Troy moved forward, drenched in sorrow, wrapped in moonlight, and carried by the gentle rhythm of fate. Tonight, we arrive at the hush before the end. A hush that feels like velvet laid over the shoulders of a sleeping city. Troy breathes slowly beneath the vault of stars. Its streets fold inward like closed petals. Torches gutter softly in the wind. A silver moon watches without rushing. This chapter is a quiet litany of small moments, care, prophecy, a quiet deception, the gentle acceptance of a people lulled by ease. Listen closely, and you will hear the soft current of time pulling at the edges of the night. Paris does not stride now with the careless grace of a young prince. He moves with the softness of someone grown thin around the edges. A small wound has settled into him like a word that will not leave. An arrow, its pain not loud, but persistent, sits under his skin like weather that will not pass. It was not a dramatic fall, it was a thorn slowly sinking. Helen tends to him with quiet hands, like one who knows how to soothe a fevered dream. She does not call out, she does not weep in public. She sits by his bedside as dusk folds into night, smoothing linen, pressing cool cloths to his brow, tracing the contour of his face with the gentleness of a lullaby. Her voice is a small river, soft and steady, and Paris listens as if the sound itself heals him. In the shade of the palace, Helen moves through a world she no longer fully owns. Every corner holds a memory not entirely hers. Every tapestry seems to whisper of another life. She gathers herbs in silence. She boils delicate teas that steam like soft incense. She hums ancient melodies beneath her breath, songs that float down corridors and find the sleeping cats on their windowsills. At times she walks the ramparts, looking out at the fleet like a woman reading the tide line of her own past. The sea answers only in long, measured swells, patient, unchangeable. Cassandra wanders the stone rooms and hunched corridors, carrying her impossible knowledge like a lantern that casts fragile, trembling light. She speaks low things into the ears of those who will not hear, warnings made of weather and the shape of smoke, images of embers gathering beneath ordinary wood. Troy will sleep as if the night itself were a lullaby, she whispers in the market, her voice thin as reed. It will burn in a sleep so complete that even the gods might miss the first sigh. People nod politely. They keep their festival plates full. They pat her hand with the practiced comfort of those who love someone who sees too much. But her words drop like soft stones into a pond of indifference. The ripples are small and quickly forgotten. She walks on, eyes distant, lips moving as if reciting a line of poetry from a future only she can read. Life inside the walls is steeped in ritual and ordinary tenderness. Mothers tighten the knots of their children's cloaks. Fishermen mend nets by lamplight. Old men trace the grooves of memory on their palms and tell quiet stories of harvests and songs. There is a particular slow beauty here, the kind that wraps itself around small acts. A loaf sliced to share, a hand held across a table, laughter caught and released in tiny bursts. The air smells of bread and thyme and the smoke of hearths gone gentle. And yet beneath this soft domestic music, a faint note hums almost inaudible, the tiny premonition of change. Sinon arrives like a weathered shadow with a story pressed to his lips. He is not the sort of man who asks for a warm bed. He comes wrapped in the rough fabrics of a traveler, with eyes that glance away from warm hearths and old friends. He is captured quietly outside the gates, found wandering near the old road with a tale to tell and a look about him that suggests he has carried burdens for too long. When they bring him to the square, he looks small under the torches, but speaks with a calm that keeps everyone leaning in. He tells of hardships at sea, of false promises by men who trade in lies as readily as they trade in silver. His voice is weathered, but not dishonest. He weaves a story of a great wooden offering to the gods, a craft so magnificent it would stand as testament to Greek cleverness and humility both. He says the horse is an offering, a gift to Athena, a shrine that will leave the people of Troy humbled and grateful. He speaks of trickery as if it is sorrowful art, a performance crafted by desperate men. People listen because the story flutters like a moth against flames too curious to ignore. His words ride the cool night air into the closest ears. The wine-barked merchants, the young men on the walls, the mothers by their windows. And in the murmurings of the market, the idea begins to settle not as suspicion but as a slow, glowing possibility. To bring such a gift into the city would please the gods, an elder says, tapping his chin. It would be a sign, a priest whispers, trying on the idea as if it were a cloak. Sinon's story is gentle but pointed. He speaks of departure and refusal, of the Greeks' constructed grief, leaving a monument for appeasement. He paints the horse in broad, sympathetic strokes, its wood polished, its belly hollow, its size a marvel. He is careful with the details, like a singer choosing which notes to leave out. He leaves the sharp edges vague, and the people fill the spaces with their own hunger, for peace, for proof that the gods favor them, for a talisman to hang over the city's threshold and make the nights safe again. A party blooms like a pale flower after his telling. They do not call it celebration in the grand sense. They call it a ritual of thanks. They gather in the plaza with more wine than usual, more bread, and a sense of release soft as mist. The horse stands in the square, tall and hollow in the glow of lanterns. Children run around its legs, daring one another to touch its belly and shriek with the delightful fear of being close to something enormous. Old men clap slow hands and stroke their beards. A priest mutters a blessing and sprinkles a little oil along its flank. The sun sets, as if in approval, the sky folding like a curtain. Cassandra watches the scene from a darkened doorway. Her hands are clasped, her lips tight. She says nothing, because she knows their faith is a wall against her voice. Her heart beats a lonely drum. She can see the tiny sparks gathering like secrets in a dry field. Her throat tightens with the knowledge that comfort can be a dangerous thing, and that sometimes the sweetest lullaby is the one that cannot wake you from your own dream. Still, the city moves forward, embracing ease as a balm. The festival becomes more elaborate with each hour. The wine flows smoother than the river, and laughter rises in soft bubbles. Families sit together beneath open skies, their silhouettes warm under the lamps. They share stories old and small about harvests, births, and weddings. They clasp hands across benches. They let their voices soften into a purring contentment that seems to believe itself invincible. That night, the great gates are opened, not out of carelessness, but from a strange conviction that peace is the greatest prayer. There is a faith in the city now fragile, perhaps, and optimistic that a gift will anchor the gods to their favor. The horse is pulled slowly into the embrace of Troy's streets by strong men whose faces show the tired glow of so many seasons turned. They drag it through lantern-lit alleys and past balconies where women peer from embroidered curtains. People lean out and call blessings as if their voices could stitch the hollow wood to the city's heart. The procession mirrors ancient rites, the murmuring of priests, the scattering of frankincense, the low, rhythmic steps of those who carry the apology of the Greeks. The wooden body creaks in the night as it rolls, a deep, soft sound like an old door settling in its frame. Children drift to sleep under the cadence of that creak, dreaming of horses and fields and wild, soft things. There is a dignity in the movement, a composure that ushers in the belief that this will be an offering rather than a threat. As the horse passes the palace, Paris catches sight of it from the balcony. He is drawn closer by something more than curiosity, a hope perhaps, or a quiet wish that the rhythm of the world might be restored without more loss. Helen stands at his side, her hand finding his in the dim light. They watch together, hearts still beating with the slow, weary cadence of two people who have hauled a lifetime behind them like a soft cloak. They do not speak, they only breathe the same air. At the feast that follows, the city is warm with an unfamiliar lightness. Plates clink. Voices weave into one another like threads in a tapestry. A wandering musician, a small man with a lute that seems older than his hands, plays a lullaby that flows through the crowd like honey. The children sway in sleepy arcs. The elders smile with the thin, patient kindness of those who have seen many seasons. For some hours, the weight of the years lifts. It seems possible, for the time being, that the future might be gentler than the past. The priests perform their rites with practiced hands. They lay offerings at the base of the horse grain, oil, small statuettes carved from ivory. The flames of small torches lick the night, casting long, moving shadows across the cobbles. A hush falls as a blessing is given in formal words, and for a breath of a moment, the sounds that had threaded through the city are softened into a calm, so deep it feels like the world is inhaling. Yet even amid the warmth, a vibration hums under the surface that cannot be named. It is not fear as much as forgetfulness, the kind that slips like a blanket over worry and makes it tidy, small, manageable. People fold their hands, believing the ritual binds them, binds the city to the gods and to safety. They close their eyes and imagine a future where this night becomes a memory that brings only comfort. Sinon sits near the edge of the great square as the feast goes on. He watches the faces, the laughter, the ease. A small, almost resigned smile plays at his lips, as if he is watching a play where every actor believes in the ending. He thinks of the men who built the horse in secret, of the planning and the whispered pacts, of the wooden ribs hollow inside like the secrets each person keeps within their chest. He knows that stories are often accepted because hearts want them to be true, and he feels a murmur of pity and sorrow for the city that will soon cradle its own undoing. As the night deepens, the firelight softens into long pools of gold. People drift toward their homes with the slow, melodic steps of the well-fed and the well-loved. Lanterns are dimmed. The city settles like a beast curling its tail around itself. Doors close quietly, windows are latched. The great wooden horse stands in the square, a sleeping giant, its hollow belly a dark promise. Cassandra moves through the sleeping streets, her feet making almost no sound on the stones. She pauses before the horse and lays her palm against its coarse flank. Her fingers are cool against the wood. She whispers one last thing, not to the people who will not hear, but to the horse itself, to the city, to the night sky, to the delicate fabric of fate that holds everything together. Troy will sleep, she says softly, her breath fogging in the cool air. And in that sleep, it will dream of fire. Her whisper is a benediction and a plea. It falls into the dark like a silver leaf. Nobody hears her words as prophecy. They pass instead as the mumbled thought of a lonely woman. The city hums on, deep and full, like a throat mid-song. The moon moves higher, and the lanterns blink out in careful rhythm. In the innermost rooms of the palace, Helen draws a deep breath and allows herself a rare, unguarded sigh. She leans into Paris' shoulder, closing her eyes like a child being led to sleep. Outside, the sea breathes in measured waves. The world seems, for a time, at rest. Far from this warmth, the hollow horse stands as a quiet silhouette beneath the stars. Seen from one angle, it looks like a sentinel, a guardian left by enemies who suddenly felt remorse. Seen from another, it looks like a doorway, an invitation with no lock. The city accepts it, and acceptance is, in that moment, its own kind of prayer. And so, as candlelight and moonlight mingle into one soft glow, the people of Troy fall into a confident sleep. Their dreams that night are gentle. Of harvests, of children laughing, of olive trees heavy with fruit. They dream of the sound of waves like a slow metronome, and of the taste of fresh bread in the morning. They dream themselves into a safe, soft future. Cassandra watches from the edge of the square until the last laugh drifts away and the last lanterns are dim. She knows the night will not remain ordinary. She knows, with the clear, unbearable certainty of those who carry unwelcome truth, that the city's trust tonight will be the sleeping blanket that keeps its embers close, too close. She turns away only when the hush becomes complete. She walks to the inner sanctum of the temple, lays down upon the cool stone, and closes her eyes. Her rest is not deep. It is watchful. It is the kind of sleep that paces the borders of dreams and waking. In the still hours before dawn, the square stands empty but for the wooden giant and the pale, patient moon. A few night guards pass by in a slow, dutiful rhythm. They glance at the horse and nod. Their faces are calm. The city sleeps, and the horse sleeps too, mute and massive, as if dreaming of its own purpose. Outside, where the coastline meets dark sea, a faint breeze carries the smell of cedar and wet stone. It moves through the alleys and alleys into the palace, into bedrooms, into the hollow where the horse stands. It is as if the earth breathes one long, final sigh, and the night keeps its secrets close. It folds itself around Troy like a soft, unread book. The city dreams, believing in a gentle tomorrow, and in the heart of that dreamy faith, the wooden ribs of the horse hum with sleeping intent, quiet, patient, and complete. In the last drifting minute before dawn, the people of Troy sleep as people do in places that feel safe. They hold one another and breathe slow. They dream of small mercies and steady mornings. They do not know that their dreams are written on wood and rope in the quiet hands of strangers. They do not know that acceptance tonight will be the cradle of tomorrow's sorrow. And so we leave them in this soft hour sleeping, trusting, warmed by hearth and love, and the steady rhythm of the sea, not yet awake to the trickle of fate that waits just beyond the circle of their lamps. For now, the city is a sleeping garden, lush, and unaware. For now, the night is full of lullabies, and the brave comfort of ritual. For now, the world breathes slow and soft, and the story of Troy holds its breath with them. Night settles over Troy like a slow curtain slipping from the sky, not abruptly, not with force, but gently, as though the world is being tucked into sleep for the last time. The stars blink awake, faint and delicate, far above the sleeping roofs. The wind moves like a wandering thought, brushing softly through narrow alleys and over the smooth stones worn by centuries of footsteps. The giant wooden horse stands silent in the square, its shadow stretching long and thin under the moonlight. The city sleeps, deeply, trustingly, like a child curling against a warm blanket, unaware of the chill creeping across the floor. The laughter of the feast has faded. The wine jars rest empty under tables. Lanterns burn low, their flames leaning sideways in the breeze. Dogs curl in doorways, breathing slow. The last conversations from the banquet sink into the stillness like petals drifting onto water. Inside the palace, Helen finally sleeps, her breathing soft, slow, dream-thick. Paris lies beside her, breath shallow from pain but still steady. His hand rests against hers, as though instinctively seeking warmth. Somewhere in another chamber, Priam sleeps in his chair with a scroll fallen across his lap. The old king breathes in the deep, low rhythm of someone exhausted by years of carrying a city's burdens. Cassandra does not sleep. She sits upright by the temple window, watching the square. Her eyes never leave the wooden horse, not for a moment, not even when her vision blurs. And under the enormous belly of the horse within its hollow ribs something shifts. A quiet, almost imperceptible shuffle. The faintest creak of wood bending under weight. A breath held too long. A whisper of leather brushing against timber. If the city were awake, the sound might be noticed, might stir suspicion, might spark a question. But Troy sleeps too deeply to hear it. Inside the horse, the air is warm and tense. Greek warriors sit in cramped silence, their bodies pressed close, breaths soft, eyes open in the dark, waiting, listening. Their fingers rest not on weapons, but on the worn wood itself, sensing every vibration. They wait for the signal, the right moment, the dream-deep stillness. Outside, the moon travels slowly across the sky. Its light drapes the rooftops in a pale silver glow. It bathes the palace walls in cool radiance. It slides across the horse's wooden flank, like a painter's silent brushstroke. A hush settles across Troy, a hush too deep to be natural, too perfect to be comforting. A hush that feels like the pause inside a dream before something shifts. Then, from within the horse, a latch moves. Softly, delicately, like fingers easing open the lid of a music box. The sound is barely more than a sigh, but in the enormous quiet of the night, it feels like the first ripple in a still pond. A small panel in the horse's side opens inward. Warm air from the night drifts inside. A faint breeze enters the hollow body. Greek warriors exchange glances shaped by resolve and sorrow and inevitability. The first silhouette emerges. He slips into the night like a shadow separating itself from darkness. No clatter, no metallic ring, only soft footsteps landing on cool stone. Others follow. One by one, silhouettes drop from the belly of the horse like silent birds gliding to earth. They do not speak. Their breaths remain contained in their throats. Their hearts beat slow and controlled. They move through the square in a strange, dreamlike procession, a scattering of shadows rippling outward like ink spreading through paper. The air shifts with their movement. The wind awakens, not violently but with purpose. It curls through the alleys, brushing at curtains left half open. It nudges lamps, causing flames to tremble. It whispers along the ground with a low hum, Above the city, the sky seems to darken, not from clouds, but from something more subtle, a feeling, a heaviness, a quiet awareness in the fabric of night. At the gates, guards sit slumped in their chairs, lulled by wine and the sweet comfort of peace. Their heads droop, their spears lean loosely against the wall, their torches flicker lower, casting wavering circles of orange on the stone. From the shadows, Greek silhouettes appear like silent ghosts. They approach the gates not with aggression, but with the slow precision of a ritual. Hands rise quietly. Ropes are loosened, latches tested. The great hinges groan beneath the faintest pressure. The wind grows stronger. It gathers in long, rising breaths, as though the very world is inhaling deeply, preparing for something it cannot name. And then the gate opens, not explosively, not dramatically, but with a long, aching sigh, as though Troy itself is exhaling for the last time. The wind rushes through the opening, pouring into the city like a cool tide. It swirls around the silhouettes, lifting their cloaks, tugging at their hair, guiding them deeper into the sleeping streets. The city does not wake, not yet. The guards stir only faintly, faces relaxed, eyes drifting back into slumber. The Greek shadows spread through the city, their footsteps soft as falling snow. They move down narrow alleys, across courtyards, past fountains whose waters reflect the trembling moonlight. The first flames appear almost accidentally, a spark kissing the edge of a tapestry, a small glow beneath a wooden beam, a flicker barely brighter than a candle. The flames do not roar, they whisper, they rise slowly, curling like fingers reaching upward, hungry not in fury but in inevitability. They glow golden red, their warmth soft at first, their light gentle and wavering, casting long shadows that dance along the walls in restless patterns. The wind stirs again, it pushes the flames in deliberate directions. It breathes them forward, feeding them with the quiet certainty of destiny. A second flame joins the first, then another, like stars appearing one by one in a darkening sky. Tiny lights glowing across the city, scattered like beads of molten amber. From her temple window, Cassandra rises slowly. Her lips tremble, her eyes widen. The glimmers of fire reflect in her gaze like visions taking shape. She whispers to herself, voice barely audible. I told them this night would burn, but no one hears her. The city remains wrapped in its slumber. Dreams swirl within its walls, soft and comforting, oblivious to the creeping glow on the horizon. The first alarm does not come from a shout. It comes from the wind, a sudden gust, a long, mournful push of air that sweeps through the palace halls, lifting curtains, snuffing candles, causing Helen to stir in her sleep. She opens her eyes slowly, not fully awake, not yet understanding. Paris shifts beside her, murmuring incoherently, lost in a haze of fever and dreams. Helen sits up. The air feels different, warm, metallic, alive with a subtle quiver. She moves to the balcony, her bare feet quiet against the stone. She steps into the night air and looks outward. And she sees it, small, distant, but unmistakable. A glowing cluster of flickering orange near the lower streets. Her hand rises to her lips, her breath catches. She does not scream. The sight is too unreal, too dreamlike to provoke anything but silent dread. The flames spread in long, slow arcs, creeping across rooftops, curling upward like living shadows made of light. They move gently, almost gracefully, like dancers swaying in the dim glow before dawn. The wind blows again, this time stronger. It bends the flames sideways, pushing them further into the city's heart. It whistles through alleys, lifting ashes into the air. It moans low and deep, a sound like an old memory resurfacing. Cassandra steps onto the temple steps. Her hair whips around her face. Her robes flutter wildly. She raises her arms as if addressing the night itself. It begins, she whispers. softly, gently, as all endings do. The flames grow brighter. Their glow washes across stone walls and sleeping faces. People begin to stir in their homes. A child wakes and rubs her eyes. An old woman rises from her mat and touches the warm air. A man walks onto his balcony and watches the orange tide unfurl. Whispers ripple through the city. Not screams, not chaos, just soft, confused murmurs, like echoes inside a dream one cannot fully understand. From the palace balcony, Helen watches the fire move with eerie calm. It spreads like a memory returning, like something inevitable finally arriving. Paris rises behind her, leaning weakly against the doorway. He follows her gaze. His eyes widen with a slow, sinking weight. He realizes the truth not in a rush, but in a slow, painful clarity. "Troy," he murmurs, barely breathing the word. It is falling. Helen takes his hand. Her fingers shake, but her touch is steady. "We are still here," she whispers, "and we will face whatever comes." Far below them, the flames bloom larger, reaching new rooftops, casting long ribbons of orange and scarlet across the dark. The Greek shadows spread as well, moving with quiet purpose, with the certainty of tides and seasons and fate. Their silhouettes slip through doorways and across courtyards, blending with the moving light like ink mixing with water. The city awakens slowly, not in panic but in confusion. People step into the streets, eyes wide, breaths uneven. They see the flames rising. They see the shadows drifting. They hear the wind moan through the gates and realize too late that the night has turned. Priam rushes through the palace corridors, his robe dragging behind him. His hands shake as he leans against the stone walls. He looks out across the burning streets and feels his heart break, not with shock but with recognition. He has seen this night before in nightmares, in visions, in the trembling words of Cassandra. He closes his eyes. One tear falls, a tear shaped by decades of love for a city that once shone like a jewel in the sun. He whispers its name, Troy. The flames grow higher. They crackle softly, filling the air with glowing embers that drift like fireflies. The sound is not violent, just persistent, soft, steady, like a distant storm rolling across open water. The wind surges again. It rushes through the broken gate, through alleys, through courtyards, carrying the smell of burning wood and old dreams. The city glows from within, a lantern lit too brightly, its light flickering wildly in the darkness. The heat pushes upward, turning the sky a deep, smoldering red. Ash floats gently through the air like gray snow, settling on rooftops, on hair, on silent lips. Cassandra stands among the embers, her face illuminated by the wavering glow. She opens her arms to the burning city and whispers, "It is not fire that destroys us. It is the sleep we wrapped ourselves in." The wooden horse watches silently from the square, its hollow belly now empty, its purpose fulfilled. Flames lick at its legs, catching slowly, as if the giant itself sighs into the inevitable. The city's towers glow. Roofs collapse with soft, muffled groans. Stone cracks, walls lean. The sound is like waves breaking on distant cliffs, slow, deep, melancholic. Troy collapses not with force but with surrender, like a body slipping into deep sleep, giving in to weight, to time, to destiny. Helen holds Paris as he weakens. He folds into her arms, his breath shallow, his eyes dim but gentle. "I am sorry," he whispers. She shakes her head. There is nothing to forgive. Priam descends the palace steps. He walks into the burning streets. His silhouette is steady, frail, but unbroken. He carries sorrow with the dignity of an old king who knows that everything loved must one day be released. The flames reach higher, painting the sky with ribbons of red and gold. The wind howls softly, its voice layered with grief. The Greek shadows remain quiet, moving through the dreamlike haze with solemn purpose. For a moment, the entire world glows as though the gods themselves have lit a candle over the final breath of a once great city. And then, slowly, softly, inevitably, Troy folds into itself. Fire consumes its last song, the night trembles, the sea sighs, and the city that stood for generations becomes a memory carried on smoke. The flames flicker, the wind calms, the shadows retreat, the sky slowly loses its redness, fading into the deep, blue-black quiet of a spent night. Troy is silent, a silence vast enough to feel like the moment after a dream ends, a silence heavy enough to echo in the chambers of the world. And yet it is not an ending, only a turning, a breath held between stories, a doorway from sorrow to legend. As dawn approaches, a pale, exhausted light touches the ruins. Smoke curls upward in thin, ghostly ribbons. The once bright city lies in soft heaps of ember and ash. The sea breathes slowly beside it. The sky waits. And the story of Troy, rising from the embers of this quiet catastrophe, moves gently into its final chapter. Dawn rises gently over the ruins of Troy. Not quickly, not harshly, but with the trembling softness of a candle being lit in a quiet room. Its pale light stretches slowly across fallen walls, touching the stones with a tenderness that feels almost like apology. Smoke lifts from the ground in long, thin ribbons, curling toward the morning sky like tired spirits returning home. The night's roar has dissolved into a hushed, delicate stillness, a stillness that feels like the world holding its breath after a long, sorrowful sigh. In the midst of this silence, Aeneas moves through the haze. He is steady, not unbroken. No one who lived this night could be unbroken but steady, like a rooted tree that has survived the passing of a great storm. His breath is calm, his footsteps quiet. He carries his father, Anchises, on his back, the old man's frail arms wrapped around his shoulders like soft branches clinging to their last remaining strength. Beside him walks his young son, Ascanius. The boy's fingers cling tightly to Aeneas' tunic, seeking warmth, seeking safety, seeking something familiar in a world that has changed in a single night. They move through the smoke, as though walking through a dream half remembered. The ground is warm beneath their feet, the air heavy with the scent of ash and distant sea salt. Around them, survivors rise slowly from hiding places, women holding infants, elders leaning on sticks, warriors who have set aside their weapons, all stepping into the soft morning light as if waking from a long sleep. Aeneas meets their eyes. One by one, there is no need for words. They fall into step behind him, moving like a quiet procession, like pilgrims leaving behind a sacred place. The wind has calmed. It brushes gently across their faces, soft as a sigh, cool as the first breath after tears. The sea in the distance murmurs in low, comforting tones, a sound that feels like memory more than present. Aeneas looks back only once. The ruins of Troy shimmer in the rising sun, glowing faintly like smoldering embers in the last stage of cooling. The towers that once touched the sky are now softened silhouettes. Their jagged edges blur under the light, becoming shapes remembered rather than feared. Aeneas bows his head, not in despair, but in reverence. Beside him, Anchises lifts a trembling hand and touches his son's hair. "My child," he whispers, "do not look back too long." Aeneas nods. His voice is quiet, barely more than a breath. There is nothing there that remains ours. But his heart knows the truth that Troy is not simply walls of stone. Troy is memory, carried now in each of their steps, each heartbeat, each story they will tell beyond these shores. They walk toward the mountains. The ground rises gently, step by slow step, like the world lifting them toward a new horizon. Birds begin to sing faintly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether it is safe. Their notes drift through the air like tiny glimmers of hope. The survivors follow the sound, their path illuminated not by torches or war banners, but by the soft brightness of morning. Cassandra emerges from the temple ruins, her hair faintly dusted with ash, her eyes clear, so clear that the air around her feels shaken. She stands silently as the group passes. Some look at her with sorrow, some with awe, but most look away, unable to meet the gaze of someone who had understood too much, too early, too clearly. Aeneas pauses in front of her, their eyes meet. In hers he sees both endings and beginnings, woven together like intertwined threads. She places her palm over his heart. "Go," she whispers. "Your thread does not end here." He nods, breathing in the weight of her blessing. Then he turns once more toward the rising hills. Behind them, the ruins settle deeper into silence. The flames are dying, shrinking into soft glows beneath charred beams. The wind lifts the ashes in slow spirals, carrying them upward, higher, higher, until they dissolve into the air like fading memories. Some drift over the sea, some scatter across fields that once held laughter and festivals. Some cling to the stones, settling into cracks like tiny echoes of a world that once breathed vibrantly. In the palace, Helen stands alone for a moment. The air inside is cool, still, filled with a faint scent of cedar and extinguished fire. She walks through the hall in a slow, almost floating motion, her fingers brushing along the carved walls as if memorizing the touch of a place she had never fully belonged to. Paris lies still, his breath faint and shallow. He looks peaceful, as though the fever has carried him into a quiet sleep from which he does not need to return. Helen kneels beside him. She smooths his hair, fingers trembling with tenderness. "You gave me love," she whispers. In a world that did not understand it, she presses one last kiss to his forehead, a whisper of warmth, a small, soft farewell. Then she stands. Her movement is slow but steady, like the tide pulling gently away from shore. Menelaus waits outside, his face wearied by years of longing, his eyes uncertain but not unkind. Helen steps toward him, not in fear, not in shame, but in acceptance of what the world now asks of her. He reaches out not to claim her, not to bind her, but to support her as she walks. Their steps fall into the same rhythm, a soft reconciliation shaped not by passion or triumph, but by time. They leave the ruins behind them, their path leading toward the harbor where the sea glimmers with the promise of home. Meanwhile, Aeneas' quiet procession reaches the foothills. The city now lies far below them, a mosaic of ash and memory. The survivors pause to catch their breath, their silhouettes delicate against the morning sky. Aeneas kneels and helps Anchises down from his back. The old man sits upon a fallen stone, breathing in the fresh air with a trembling chest. Ascanius stands at Aeneas' side, his small hand wrapping around his father's. "What happens now?" the boy asks softly. Aeneas looks toward the horizon, a long line of pale gold where the sea meets the sky. He inhales deeply, slowly. The wind brushes his face, its touch gentle as the hand of a mother calming a restless child. "We go forward," Aeneas says, his voice low and steady, "to a place waiting for us, somewhere beyond the sea." The boy nods, trusting his father's quiet certainty. Anchises smiles faintly, the expression worn but warm. "Moirai have cut one thread," he murmurs, "but they have spared another." High above them, the Moirai, the three fates, stand unseen at the edge of morning's light. Clotho, the spinner, draws out a new thread of shining gold. Lachesis, the allotter, measures its length with calm, steady hands. Atropos, the cutter, places her blade gently beside the finished thread of Troy and lets it fall into the quiet pool of history. They weave a new destiny for Aeneas, a quiet, hopeful one, a thread that stretches far beyond the ashes of this night toward distant shores, toward new foundations, towards stories that will bloom from the seeds of this ending. The sun rises higher, its light grows warmer, brushing across the hillsides, pushing away the last shadows of the night. Aeneas stands, lifting his father once more. He looks back at the ruins only one more time, and this time the sight does not break him. It simply rests in his heart like a worn, precious stone, the weight familiar, the meaning deep. The survivors begin their descent toward the sea. Their steps are slow, measured, carrying both sorrow and possibility. They walk through fields washed in morning gold. Birdsong fills the air with tentative notes. The wind is gentle now, a soft accompaniment to their movement. They walk until the ruins no longer dominate the horizon, until the smoke becomes a thin cloud, until the memory of the night settles into their breaths like a distant ache. Helen and Menelaus reach the shore first. A ship waits for them, its sails folded like resting wings. The sailors bow their heads as she boards, their faces soft with sympathy. Helen stands at the bow as the ship drifts from shore, her eyes fixed on the horizon ahead. She does not watch Troy disappear behind her. She lets the sea carry her forward, away from the flames, toward the quiet promise of home. The survivors' ship, small and weathered, sits further down the coast. Aeneas helps each person aboard, his hands steady, his voice gentle. He places Anchises in a sheltered corner, wraps him in a cloak, and kisses his forehead. Then he lifts Ascanius onto the deck, placing his son beside him like a spark of the future. The ship pushes off, gliding into the soft morning waves. The sea is calm now, its surface smooth as brushed glass. The oars dip into the water with slow, rhythmic strokes. Each movement feels deliberate, a quiet step away from the past and into the uncharted quiet of tomorrow. As the ships drift farther from land, Troy becomes a small, dim silhouette. The flames die completely. The smoke dissolves. The towers blend into the shoreline until they look like nothing more than stones scattered along the coast. The world grows quiet, the air warm, the sea mild, the wind a faint whisper. It is as though nature itself is soothing the weary hearts aboard the two vessels. Aeneas watches the horizon. Helen watches the horizon. Priam's voice is gone forever, but his blessings echo in the breaths of those who survived. The Moirai weave, the sails billow gently, the sea carries them forward, and the story softens, slows, dissolves into the lull of waves. The ships float onward through the gentle morning air. No destination is urgent. No fear follows them. Only memory, only hope, only the promise that even from ashes new worlds can rise. The sea glitters, the sky lifts, and Troy becomes a memory, a sacred one, a quiet one, a story that will echo through ages in soft, golden threads. Aeneas holds his son close. Helen closes her eyes and breathes deeply. The wind settles, the sea calms, the world sighs into stillness, and the narrative, your gentle, sleep-soft narrative, comes to rest. Stories do not end, not truly. They drift, they linger, they sleep, waiting to be awakened once more in another time, another voice, another breath. And so, in the quietest whisper, the tale folds into itself. Stories never truly end. They only sleep, carried by the wind, held in the hands of time.